Most of you aren't subscribed. Make sure to subscribe, as it helps out the channel. Without further ado, our story starts with our group of heroes, heading to the royal capital, all wondering what types of celebrations are happening in town. The hero wonders what types of jobs they'll have in the future, especially because the Demon King is now defeated, prompting the priest to wonder if he can find a job where he can drink. The hero turns to the elf, Frieren, asking Frieren how she'll spend her life, especially since elven lives are very long. As the hero's party march through town, they are praised and celebrated, only to stand before the king, who acknowledges their party to house Himmel the hero, Isen the warrior, Heider the priest and Frieren the mage. Thanking the heroes for slaying the Demon King, we cut to that night where the town is celebrating their newfound peace, cutting to Himmel, who tells everyone that there will be statues of them erected. As Frieren mocks the town for only giving them 10 copper coins when they first started their adventure, Heider states that everything is now behind them and instead they should celebrate. As the gang gaze off into the night sky, they all acknowledge that it's been 10 years since they started adventuring, reminiscing on their first day, where Himmel and Isen were almost executed for bad-mouthing the king. They also remember times when Heider would get so drunk during their adventures and Frieren would constantly fall for the most basic of traps, all erupting into laughter for only remembering bad memories. Taking a breath, Himmel thanks everyone for the 10 years they spent together, but Frieren wonders what's so amazing about 10 years, reminded that 10 years by human standards is a long time. Just then, they all turn to face the night sky, spotting the air a meteor shower that only occurs once every 50 years. As the gang bicker about not getting to see the full beauty of the meteor shower from the city, Frieren utters that she'll take them to a better location next time they see it, making Himmel chuckle, grateful for the memories. The next morning, the party bid goodbye to Frieren, who plans on exploring the central lands to collect and learn more spells. As Frieren leaves, the others wonder how old Frieren truly is, cutting to several years later when Frieren has explored different locations, learned many new things, and has achieved many new goals. When Frieren visits a shopkeeper asking for a shadow dragon's horn, the shopkeeper states that shadow dragons haven't been alive for around 20 to 30 years, disappointing as Frieren needs a shadow dragon horn for her experiments. Frieren remembers that Himmel collected a shadow dragon horn in the Demon King castle, reasoning that she'll visit to watch the meteor shower with everyone whilst also collecting the shadow dragon horn. As Frieren walks through the capital, she's amazed to see everything has changed over the years, hearing Himmel's voice, but as she turns around, Frieren realizes that Himmel has grown quite old. Himmel states that it's been 50 years, both sitting down, only for Frieren to ask about the dragon horn. Remembering the memories from collecting the horn, Himmel happily gives Frieren the horn, telling Frieren that although she doesn't treasure the dragon's horn as much, Himmel himself never forgot the time spent collecting the horn. As Frieren heads outside to deliver the horn, she wonders what's the big deal about a lousy dragon's horn, only to head inside, asking Himmel to head out for the meteor shower. As they leave town, Frieren greets Isen and Heider, who are amazed to see Frieren hasn't aged one bit, but Frieren is still against Heider patting her head. Frieren praises Isen for seeming the same since they last met, something they all know is due to Isen's dwarf heritage. As they begin to head off, Frieren tells them that the spot she picked out takes a week to travel to, but seeing as this is like the old days, they all gladly follow Frieren. As the gang tells stories over campfire and battle monsters like the old days, they all eventually make it to a lake, where Himmel thanks Frieren for their final adventure together, completely captivated by their final meteor shower together. With some more time passing, Himmel's finally passes, prompting Frieren and the others to attend Himmel's funeral, but Frieren is scolded for not showing any emotions, making her wonder what this strange feeling that is bubbling up inside her. As the day proceeds, Frieren begins reminiscing on her time with Himmel, all whilst watching his casket be buried, only to break down crying, regretting not spending more time to get to know Himmel better. A few days afterwards, Heider reveals that he'll be heading back to the Holy City, getting one last look at Frieren as Heider states he'll probably pass away soon due to all the drinking. As Heider bids Isen and Frieren farewell, Frieren reveals that she will be starting her new exploration into humans, asking Isen to accompany her on her new journey, but Isen reveals that he too has grown old, asking Frieren to not to look so sad. Seeing as there is nothing left, Frieren bids Isen farewell, both heading in the opposite directions, only to cut to 20 years after Himmel's passing, where Frieren is lost in the forest outside the Holy City. Just then a young girl appears, asking if Frieren is lost, but when Frieren asks to know where Heider lives, the young girl takes Frieren to Heider's home. Happy to hear that Heider is still alive, Heider admits that it wasn't too easy to pass away, happy to hear that Frieren has brought some alcohol for his grave, but Heider reveals he had stopped drinking ages ago. Seeing the adorable girl serve herself and Heider some tea, Frieren learns the girl's name is Fern, a war orphan from the southern lands. Frieren finds it unusual for Heider to adopt Himmel's kindness, but Heider is more curious as to why Frieren is visiting him, pleased to hear that Frieren just so happened to be visiting whilst on her adventure to learn more about humans. Pleased to hear this, Heider asks if Frieren would be willing to take Fern as her apprentice mage. But Frieren is sternly against this, reminding Heider how easy it is for apprentice mages to pass away during battle. Understanding of Frieren's decision, Heider gives Frieren an ancient grimoire from the tomb of Uig the Sage, a book meant to contain lost spells for resurrection and immortality. Amazed that such a grimoire still existed, Frieren states that it'll take at least 5 to 6 years to decipher the text, but upon hearing this Heider reveals that he is indeed quite afraid of dying, asking for Frieren to give him the slightest hope for immortality. As repayment for the grimoire, Frieren agrees to teach Fern some spells, cutting to later that day where Frieren had finally managed to track down Fern waiting for her on the cliff of a forest, impressed that Fern is able to conceal her mana so well. Fern states that Heider will give Fern the title of mage if Fern manages to blast a hole in a boulder across from them, something Frieren praises Heider for setting Fern. Out of nowhere, Fern conjures a powerful beam of magic, but the beam falls short of reaching the boulder, giving Frieren some motivation to teach Fern, happy to hear that Fern likes magic just like herself. Taking Fern to a nearby waterfall, Frieren tells Fern that long-range magic consists of 3 key factors, these being mana capacity, strength of firing the spell and the level of the mage itself. When Fern confirms she knows this already, Frieren states that Fern's spell falling short means Fern is lacking in mana firing strength, something Fern will need to spend time on. Seeing Fern upset, Frieren reminds Fern that her magic control is still very high, something very unique especially for such a young age. That night, Frieren shares a meal with Heider and Fern, only to end the night by studying the grimoire. With several years of Frieren training Fern, all 3 spending time together and Frieren deciphering the grimoire, Frieren reports to Heider that Fern has grown so much in 4 years. With Heider happy to hear that, Frieren mentions how she'll probably finish deciphering the grimoire before Fern becomes a fully fledged mage, but as Frieren turns to check on Heider's reaction, she spots Heider has collapsed. As Frieren moves Heider to his bed, Heider apologizes for the trouble, asking Frieren to not look so sad. With Frieren promising to decipher grimoire fast, Frieren first heads out to inform Fern that Heider has collapsed, asking Fern to halt her training to look after Heider. Sadly, Fern states that if she stops now, she won't be able to show Heider how strong she's gotten before Heider passes, revealing that Heider was the one that saved her. Flashing back, a young Fern is seen grasping onto a necklace with a picture of her family, wondering if she should take her own life. Out of nowhere, Heider appears, advising Fern to reconsider her actions as Heider once had a friend that had passed away. Heider states that his friend was the epitome of justice, and Heider had wished that his life was taken instead of his friend, but since his friend is no longer with him, Heider states that he'll stay alive to ensure the memories of his precious friends live on. With the young Fern remembering the memories she had with her family, Fern in the present declares that Heider had always feared of leaving Fern alone. Therefore Fern states that she wants to show Heider she can fend for herself before Heider passes away. With Frieren understanding Fern's wishes, Frieren states that she'll allow Fern to do as she pleases, heading back to continue deciphering the grimoire. As more time passes, Fern is seen continuing to improve her mana capacity and firing strength, all whilst Frieren finishes up deciphering the grimoire, only to ask if Heider already knew the grimoire didn't contain any spells to bring back the dead nor immortality. Heider reveals that magic for immortality doesn't exist, happy to hear that Frieren now considers Fern a mage, meaning Frieren can finally take Fern with her on her travels. With Frieren realizing Heider had tricked her into training Fern, Heider states that her reward is in the nearby drawer, asking for Frieren to take Fern and leave by tonight. Frieren calls out Heider for trying to act tough, revealing that Fern has been waiting to say goodbye to Heider, breaking down as Frieren orders Heider to spend his remaining time with Fern. As Frieren goes on a walk, Frieren learns that Heider had saved Fern, knowing that Himmel would have done the exact same thing, leaving Heider and Fern alone, only to confirm that Fern had managed to reach the boulder. The next day marks the death of Heider, prompting Fern and Frieren to pour out some booze on Heider's tombstone, only for them to head elsewhere. With 26 years passing since Himmel's death, Fern and Frieren continue to adventure together, both completing tasks in order to acquire new spells. Their most recent spell produces warm tea, whereas some previous ones involved removing rust from bronze statues and turning sweet grapes sour. As the two head to their next adventure, they meet up with an old lady, guided to an old statue of Himmel. The lady reveals that her town was attacked by a monster years ago, but luckily Himmel had arrived and saved them, ultimately leading to a statue of Himmel being made of him. When the old lady mentions how sad it is to see the statue all beat up, Frieren corrects her, stating that it's Himmel's fault for accepting a statue of himself be made, something that reminds the lady that there was an elf with Himmel at the time. Without saying any more, Frieren helps clean up the statue, pleasing the lady, but the old lady finds it sad that the scenery around the statue is too plain. Before Frieren can use a spell to grow some flowers, Frieren suddenly remembers Himmel's favorite flower, the blue moon weed. As the old lady takes them back to her home, she's surprised to hear Frieren knows about the blue moon weeds, as they used to grow in a nearby forest, but have since long died out. Seeing Fern acting weird, Frieren asks to see what Fern is hiding, discovering that Fern has been hiding seed rats in her coat, intending on setting them free. With both girls heading out, Frieren states that they'll be heading to the nearby forest in hopes of finding some blue moon weeds, something Frieren acknowledges is for her own selfish desires. With several months of Frieren and Fern searching for the blue moon weed, the girls grow used to spending time in town, with the old lady and out in the fields. One day, Fern has a chat with the old lady, sad to see that Frieren is fixated on searching for this non-existent flower, even though Frieren could be saving lives. Hearing Fern so intellectually convey her feelings, the lady hands Fern a bag of seeds, asking Fern to tell Frieren how she truly feels. Mustering up the courage, Fern tells Frieren how she feels, prompting Frieren to apologize, as she promises to end her search soon. Fern demands to know when, but Frieren points out that a nearby seed rat is leaving behind a trail and that they should follow it. As the girls chase after the seed rat, Fern wonders why Frieren is so fixated on collecting spells, but Frieren states she only started collecting spells because a special someone had begun complimenting her knowledge on spells. As both girls stop in front of an abandoned building, Frieren states that seed rats often hide seeds in different locations, but when Frieren catches a blue petal, Frieren leaps onto the top of the building. Flashing back, Frieren remembers a time when Himmel had told Frieren his favorite flower was the blue moon weed, hoping to show Frieren one day. On top of the building, Frieren is amazed to see so many blue moon weeds, grateful to finally lay eyes on them. As Fern follows after Frieren, Fern still can't understand why Frieren loves collecting spells, but Frieren reminds Fern that Fern became a mage to impress Heider, something very similar to Frieren's situation. As the girls return to show off their work to the old lady praises the girls for decorating the statue, but before Frieren leaves, she repays Heider for his gift in the past. On the 27th year since Himmel's passing, Frieren and Fern are seen visiting a trading city of Worm, where Frieren has asked to split up to restock on supplies. When Fern calls out Frieren for making her buy everything, Fern has a bad feeling when Frieren goes off on her own to buy things, having bought a massive skull in the past, clothes dissolving potions and even random books. When the two split up, Fern chooses to follow Frieren, fearing their traveling expenses will go to waste, but spots Frieren in front of an accessory store. With Frieren distraught at what to purchase, Frieren ends up settling on something, prompting Fern to continue to tail Frieren. Whilst passing through some alleys, Fern wonders if she should leave Frieren be, but when she overhears that Frieren is planning on buying some desserts, Fern gets jealous, having not had any desserts in months. Following Frieren into a smoky tavern, Fern gets worried that Frieren is lost, spotting Frieren speaking with some scary-looking men. As Frieren leaves the tavern, Fern notices that she's heading back to the inn, rushing to finish off her duties, only to apologize for finishing shopping so late. Brushing that aside, Frieren takes Fern to the recommended dessert store, allowing Fern to buy whatever dessert she wants, revealing that she had been saving up money to treat Fern and herself. When Fern asks what Frieren would like, Fern states that she already knows Frieren wants Merker pudding, reminding Frieren of her time with the heroes, where Himmel had mentioned that he knows Frieren's favorite dessert is the Merker pudding. When Frieren feels bad for not knowing much about the others, Himmel mentions his favorite food is an omelette. Aizen's favorite food are sour grapes and Heider simply loves alcohol. As Fern digs into her dessert, Frieren apologizes for not knowing more about Fern, handing Fern a gift, pleasing Fern as Frieren remembered Fern's birthday. Fern smiles upon receiving a hair ornament, telling Frieren that it's enough of a birthday gift that Frieren remembered her birthday, confusing Frieren. The next day, the two leave the city, but as Fern walks alongside Frieren with her new hair ornament, Fern asks what the end goal of their adventures are. Frieren simply states that she's simply collecting as many spells as possible, but she does want to retrace her memories with the hero party, something Fern is curious about. When Fern walks beside Frieren, Frieren realizes that Fern is now 16 and taller than her, but gets jealous at how Fern has already outgrown her in other areas. In the forest of Grobe, Frieren is seen testing out Fern's defensive spells, pointing out how the gaps in Fern's barrier will be the downfall. When Frieren fires multiple projectiles, Fern manages to block with a simple barrier around her body, but ultimately runs out of mana. As the two continue through the forest, Frieren reminds Fern that defensive magic is powerful, but it depletes mana very fast, therefore it's best to only cast barriers at the points of impact. As they both cross a river, Fern states that she simply needs to master a single defensive spell, but Frieren scolds her for not reading the book she gave her, as magic theory is just as important as practical applications. Finally arriving at a village, Fern wonders what spells Frieren intends to collect at the village, but Frieren states that she's here for other reasons. Upon approaching some villagers, a village elder immediately recognizes Frieren's white elven hair, leading Frieren to where Qual was sealed. Along the way, Frieren tells Fern that Qual is the Elder Sage of Corruption, a demon that terrorized people for 80 years, up until Himmel and his party sealed him. When Frieren wonders how the Elder knew who she was, the Elder reveals that Himmel would always visit up until his passing, but spoke highly of Frieren, stating that she would take over and watch the seal when Himmel's was gone. Upon arriving at Qual's seal, Frieren confirms that the seal is indeed weakening, but Frieren will break the seal and defeat Qual the next day. With Fern and Frieren staying the night, Fern deduces that Frieren was the one that sealed Qual, wondering why the heroes choose to seal the demon. Frieren reveals that their party were unable to defeat the demon, as Qual was a powerful mage, having invented the Zoltrak piercing spell, first of its kind that could pierce any sort of defense and destroy the target's body. Legend says that 40% of adventurers and 70% of mages were defeated by that single spell, but hearing something so powerful, Fern wonders how Qual can be defeated, but Frieren reveals such a powerful spell has its downsides. When Fern continues to ask more questions, Frieren scolds Fern for not reading the book she gave her, stating that Fern will have her questions answered tomorrow. With the big day arriving, the two girls stand before Qual, only for Frieren to warn Fern to be on guard, all whilst Frieren lifts Qual's seal. Glad to be free, Qual learns that he's been sealed for 80 years and that the Demon King had been defeated in his absence. Annoyed, Qual proceeds to cast his Zoltrak, prompting Frieren to instruct Fern to erect a barrier, but when the dust clears, Fern's barrier manages to easily block Qual's killing spell. With Fern demanding to know why her basic barrier was able to block such a deadly spell, Frieren reveals that ever since Qual was sealed away, all of humankind had dedicated resources to studying and defending against the killing spell. After a few years, the humans incorporated said spells into their systems, and as a result all types of defense magic were improved thanks to Qual. Amazed at what the humans were able to develop in the 80 years that he was sealed, Qual analyzes Fern's barrier, noting how the barrier changes depending on the type of offensive magic, meaning the spell consumes a huge amount of mana. As Qual erupts with power, Frieren orders Fern to protect both of them as efficiently as possible, prompting Fern to erect barriers only in the location of Qual's projectiles. Unleashing a massive beam of magic, Qual is impressed that Fern is still able to block his overwhelming magic, but spots Frieren is now floating in the sky, helplessly watching as Frieren casts her own Zoltrak killing spell. As Qual begins to disappear, Frieren and Fern head back to the village where Frieren is thanked by the village elder, grateful that they can now live in peace. When the elder hands Frieren his hat, Frieren recognizes the elder as the cheeky brat that flipped her skirt when they first sealed Qual. As the girls leave by carriage, Fern is seen finally reading the book Frieren gave her, but Frieren is glad that she could fulfill Himmel's trust and bring peace to the village once and for all. With the girls heading over to the Grants Channel, Frieren is sad to see the beach is littered with debris, unfortunate as the nearby village used to all clean the beach, but now there isn't enough manpower to tidy up the beach. The village elder requests that Frieren clean up the beach, handing Frieren a grimoire belonging to the legendary mage Flom, but Fern notices something suspicious. As Frieren accepts the offer, the elder leaves for now, but Fern states that she believes the grimoire is fake, something that Frieren already knows. Frieren is happy to see that Fern has been studying, revealing almost all books about Flom are usually fakes, but Frieren states that she needed an excuse to help return the beach to its former beauty. Skipping ahead to when snow has begun to fall, Fern is seen visiting a local bakery, chatting with the shopkeeper as Fern has been frequently purchasing bread from the bakery in the past 3 months. With Fern noting how it's already winter, Fern returns to a messy room, disappointed as Frieren is still asleep. As Frieren struggles to leave bed, Fern is forced to help change, dress and feed Frieren, dragging the sleepy elf through town and towards the beach. As the girls begin cleaning the beach, Fern points out how sloppy Frieren is, having been forced to take care of Frieren as if she were Frieren's mother. Fern wonders how Frieren behaved during her time with the hero party, but Frieren mentions how they were all very okay with Frieren oversleeping, but Frieren did get scolded once. With Fern curious to know more, the girls wrap up the day with a big fire using the debris, only to enjoy a nice dinner, reporting to the elder that they only have 1/3 of the job left. The elder wonders if the girl will be done by the New Year's festival, something Frieren says will be possible, but when the elder mentions how Frieren can finally join them for watching the sunset this time, Frieren acts awfully cold. The next day, Fern asks if the reason Frieren wanted to clean the beach was related to the festival, learning that every New Year, the villagers would watch the sunrise. Frieren mentions how the beach is meant to beautifully reflect the sunrise, but admits that she never woke up early enough to actually watch the sunrise. With more time passing by, Fern continues to nurture our poor Frieren out of bed, both exploring the wrecked ships, discovering hidden gems, only to officially clean the beach of all debris. Completely mesmerized by the beach's beauty, the elder asks if Frieren will be joining them for the sunrise this year, shocking Fern when Frieren agrees to wake up early to see the sunrise. Fern wonders if Frieren will be able to wake up in time for the sunrise, but Frieren states that she'll simply stay up all night, and that she wants to see what's so amazing about this sunrise. As Frieren stays up that night, she thinks about a time when Himmel had scolded Frieren for sleeping in and missed the New Year's sunrise in the same village, confused as to why a mere sunrise would cause Himmel to be so upset they didn't get to see it together. Sadly, during the morning, Fern realized that Frieren is fast asleep, forced to drag Frieren out of bed, fearing that they'll miss the sunset. With both girls staring out into the horizon, Frieren notes how there is nothing special about the sunrise, but upon seeing that Fern is mesmerized by the sunrise's beauty, Frieren admits that Himmel was right, as she's enjoying the sunrise with Fern. Flashing back, we see Frieren and the hero party visiting the graves of Eisen's family, learning that his village was attacked by demons. Heiter chooses to kneel before the graves, praying for their souls to go to heaven, but Eisen mentions how he doesn't believe in the afterlife, prompting Frieren to reveal that thousands of years ago everyone believed there was no afterlife, but since magic can't observe where souls go, it's hard to define what is truth and what isn't. Heiter states that since there is no actual proof for either side, Heiter likes to think there is a heaven. That way the people that are doing good for the world can at least pass believing that their life was worth it. With the hero party joining Heiter in praying for Eisen's family, we cut to the present where Eisen is once again praying for his family, currently located in the Bread region. Out of nowhere, Frieren calls out to Eisen, weird as they haven't spoken to each other ever since Himmels passed away 30 years ago. As they all sit down for some tea, Eisen is shocked to see Frieren has an apprentice, but Frieren asks if Eisen needs help with anything. Eisen mentions how Heiter and him had been updating each other with letters. Heading out, they all head to Vol Basin, a location Frieren recognizes, learning that Eisen intends to search for notes from Flom the legendary mage. When Frieren reminds Eisen that most records on Flom are fake, Ison reveals that Hyder and figured out the general location of Flom's true notes, based on records from the Holy City. With Frieren convinced, they all agree to start looking for a massive tree, but upon seeing Fern disappointed, Frieren states that they should hurry, surprising Ison as Frieren never cared for anyone else's time. With the gang beginning to search the entire forest, they spend the night eating and sleeping throughout the forest, only to search across the sea and in the skies. One day, Fern states that she has found a massive tree near some ruins, all beginning to head towards the tree, but Frieren uses the opportunity to ask Ison why he's searching for Flom's notes. Ison reveals that on the day of Himmel's death, Ison had seen how regretful Frieren felt for not using more time to get to know Himmel, revealing that the notes left behind were said to allow contact with the dead. When Frieren states that she doesn't believe in such nonsense, Ison states that it's better to know for sure. Plus Himmel and Hyder had agreed prior to help Frieren get to know Himmel better. Having made it to the massive tree, Fern states that there is a powerful barrier surrounding the tree, but when Frieren heads over to inspect the tree, she utters that even after 1,000 years, her master is still superior to her. Flashing back, Frieren is seen with her master, wondering why her master is so fixated on protecting a small sapling, but her master states that in 1,000 years' time, Frieren will grow to appreciate her master's lessons, reminding Frieren that her master is Flom the legendary mage. Within an instant, Frieren dispels the barrier guarding the entrance to Flom's notes. Upon glancing at the notes, Frieren is surprised the notes had already been opened to the page regarding communication with the dead, surprised her master knew Frieren would return. Flom states that the north of the continent housed the land of Oriole, where all the souls rest, a location that Flom had used to speak with her fallen allies. When Fern wonders if the notes can be trusted, Ison reminds Frieren to consider the best-case scenario when unsure, prompting Frieren to reveal that Oriole is in the same direction as Enda, the current Demon King castle. With Ison asking Frieren to go for Himmel's sake, they all head back home via carriage, where Frieren is fast asleep, dreading the thought of going to such a cold place like the Demon King's castle. Sparking up a conversation, Ison asks how Frieren is treating Fern, impressed to hear that Frieren is retracing her adventures with the hero party, but is also trying to get to know Fern better. Hearing this, Ison thinks back to how cold Frieren was back then, having never imagined Frieren would take on an apprentice, but reassures Fern that Frieren is a great teacher. As they all return to Ison's home, Ison apologizes for not coming with them, checking to see if Frieren remembers the path to Enda, relieved to hear Frieren still remembers it through the Will region, across the Regal Canyon and past the northern land checkpoints. As Frieren begins to leave, Ison informs Fern that it'll be a 10-year adventure, reminding Frieren of her adventure with the hero party, but Frieren states that it won't take too long. As Fern leaves with Frieren, Fern thinks about how she's spent half her life with Frieren, flashing back to one of Fern's last conversations with Hyder. Hyder jokes about haunting Fern if she doesn't behave around Frieren, but Fern surprises Hyder with how mature she's grown, making Hyder promise to visit her when he passes. With Fern resting by Frieren's side, the girls ride a carriage to the nearby town of the Will region, but as the girls head through town, they're stopped by a shopkeeper that warns the girls not to go into the mountains. The shopkeeper says there are rumors of ghosts taking people away, but when Frieren gets curious about what type of ghosts, the girls head around town asking for everyone's stories. Apparently, the townsfolk saw ghosts of their departed family in the mountains, with some people saying that the ghosts spoke. When Fern wonders if the work of undeads, Frieren states that undeads wouldn't appear as ghosts as undeads normally appear in the form of rotting corpses or skeletons. With the girls heading to the rooms, Fern notes how Frieren probably knows what is causing the ghosts to appear in the mountains, but is cut off when Frieren states that they'll only be staying for a single night in town. Fern demands that Frieren help out the villagers, but seeing Fern so serious about helping the villagers, Frieren agrees to help. As both girls head into the mountains, they explore the locations of said disappearances, where Frieren quizzes Fern on what type of magic created the ghosts, satisfied to hear Fern believes it's illusion magic. Heading deeper into the mountains, Fern briefly remembers a monster that used illusion magic to hunt its prey, a monster Frieren states is the Einsom. The Einsom usually uses illusion magic, creating phantoms of people's loved ones to lure them in only to devour the targets. Luckily, Frieren mentions how the Einsam's illusion magic can be easily destroyed by a mage's projectile, but warns Frieren that it may be difficult, as Frieren had to destroy the illusions of her master begging for her life. Upon entering a misty forest, Frieren orders Frieren to prepare for the worst, only for Frieren to spot an illusion of Hyder in the distance. Preparing to destroy the illusion, Frieren suddenly hears Hyder speak fondly of her, realizing the monster is using Frieren's memories to put Frieren at ease. When Frieren tries to help Frieren out, Frieren suddenly spots an illusion of Himmel, surprised as she was expecting an illusion of her master. Wondering if she has changed, Frieren nonchalantly destroys Himmel's illusion, clearing the misty forest and revealing the Einsam to Frieren, prompting Frieren to disintegrate Hyder's illusion and the monster. As Frieren reassures Frieren that Hyder won't be mad that Frieren struck an illusion of him, the girls head into the Regal Canyon, spotting a massive crimson dragon along with its nest, where Frieren spots the grimoire she's been looking for. Frieren states that dragons use magic-infused items to build their nest, asking Frieren to take out the solar dragon, but when Frieren conjures a powerful spell, her spell simply deflects off the dragon's thick exterior. With the dragon now awake, Frieren cries that they should flee, forcing Frieren to lure away the dragon, but having barely managed to lose the dragon, Frieren cries that as mages they will have a hard time defeating the dragon. Frieren acknowledges Frieren's cries. Frieren states that they'll need some help, flashing back to when Frieren and Aizen were camping out in the forest. Aizen states that he has an apprentice of his own by the name of Stark, stating that he'll be a great frontliner for Frieren's adventures and that Stark lives in the village near the Regal Canyon. As the girls visit the nearby town, they wonder why the villagers aren't more afraid of the nearby dragon, but Frieren asks why Frieren wants grimoire so badly. Frieren reveals that the grimoire has a spell that allows mages to see through clothes, weirding Frieren out, but out of nowhere an old lady states that Stark wants to meet the girls. Surprised, the girls follow the old lady, learning that 3 years ago the Crimson Dragon had massacred their town, but luckily Stark had arrived, scaring the dragon away and ever since has been protecting their town. Upon arriving near a massive rocky wall, Stark is seen playing with some town kids, asking Frieren and Frieren to not agitate the dragon so much. Stark tries to point out that he received a mark from a shadow dragon, but Frieren simply asks for Stark to drop the act. When Stark learns that Frieren used to adventure with Aizen, Stark asks for the old lady and kids to give them some privacy, revealing that he's proud that he abandoned Aizen. Frieren asks why Stark doesn't just slay the dragon, but Stark wants to know why the girls are here, learning that they've come to recruit Stark and also want the grimoire in the dragon's nest. Stark gets confused as to why Frieren wants the grimoire so badly, but doesn't mind joining Frieren's party, but reveals that he has had trouble defeating the dragon, asking for Frieren's help. Frieren states that they can defeat the dragon together if Stark distracts the dragon for 30 seconds, but upon seeing Stark refuse such an offer, Frieren deduces that Stark has never fought a monster before. Stark breaks down, begging for Frieren's help, admitting that when he first confronted the dragon, he was so scared seeing the beast, but strangely after a while the dragon flew away and Stark was praised by the villagers. With Frieren disgusted by how pathetic Stark looks, Frieren states that she has full faith in Stark, heading over to a massive fissure in the nearby wall, only to sense something. As the girls leave, Frieren states that they'll be meeting back here tomorrow, hinting at the fact that Stark should use this opportunity to grow. That night, Frieren and Frieren enjoy a nice dinner, all whilst the villagers praise Stark for being a kind person. Frieren still can't help but see Stark as a cowardly boy, but Frieren brings up the first time Frieren fought a monster, apologizing for teasing Frieren. With the girls heading back to their inn, Frieren wonders why the dragon doesn't just attack the village, but Frieren hints at the fact that it may be Stark, suggesting that Frieren visits Stark if she's curious about who he is. With Frieren heading to visit Stark, Frieren sits in her room, thinking back to when she had asked Aizen if Stark is strong. Aizen reveals that Stark was the only person to have fled like a coward when the monsters attacked his hometown, someone Aizen states is exactly like himself, hence he taught Stark everything he knew. In the dead of night, Stark is seen wielding his axe, cleaving it into the rocky wall, digging a deeper and deeper fissure with every swing. With Stark standing before the giant fissure, Stark turns to spot Frieren behind him, having just been caught for creating the massive fissure. Frieren asks why Stark doesn't just slay the nearby dragon terrorizing the nearby village, but Stark states that since the dragon hasn't attacked yet, there is no need for him to slay the beast. As Stark begins to leave, Frieren asks if Stark will slay the dragon when it does attack. Learning that although Stark knows the village depends on him, he still might consider running if the dragon is too great. Stark reveals that he had gained a mark on his face during a spar with his master Aeson, believing that Aeson was mad at him as Aeson never praised Stark. Leaning in to inspect Stark's hand, Frieren concludes that Stark would never run from a fight, confusing Stark as he wonders how Frieren would know. Frieren reveals that on her first battle with a deadly monster, Frieren had begun to flee in terror, but when she realized Frieren wouldn't help her, Frieren had no choice but to steel her resolve and fight. Frieren states that although Stark is a coward, she believes Stark will rise to the challenge to protect the village when the time comes, something that makes Stark think about Aeson. Frieren is seen reporting her chat with Stark to Frieren, but when Frieren heads to the fissure to look for Stark, she's disappointed to see that Stark has fled the scene. When Frieren states that they'll be slaying the dragon instead, Frieren refuses to leave the safety of a nearby tree, but out of nowhere Stark appears, asking if he only needs to distract the dragon for 30 seconds. Stark states that if he were to pass away during the battle, Stark asks for Frieren to guarantee the dragon is slayed, confusing Frieren as to why Stark is willing to give his life for the safety of the village. Stark reminds Frieren that he lived in the village for 3 years, cutting to later that day where the three are now standing before the red dragon, prompting Frieren to tease Stark for shaking out of fear. Frieren reveals that Aeson showed the same fear before a great fight, as Aeson would embrace the fear, something Frieren sees in Stark. Hearing that his master also would fear his battles, Stark marches into the range of the dragon, but Frieren notes that the dragon is being cautious as to not attack due to the enemy it's facing. As the dragon unleashes its fiery breath, Stark begins making his way towards the dragon, ducking and weaving until he's able to close the distance between himself and the beast. Flashing back, Frieren asks why Aeson had hit Stark during their last spar, but Aeson reveals that he feels terrible for hitting his student, but in that moment Aeson had sensed immense power from Stark, even beginning to shake. As Frieren watches Stark shatter the claws of the dragon, Stark chooses to stay close to the dragon, grabbing onto it as it takes off. Being flung into the air, Stark senses that the dragon is lining up another breath of fire, gripping his axe, only to cleave the dragon into the ground. Seeing an opening, Stark cries for Frieren and Frieren to finish off the dragon, but Frieren stops Frieren from making a move, declaring that Stark had soloed the dragon. Shocked at his own power, Frieren rushes to congratulate Stark on his first battle, but more importantly Frieren is excited to steal all the loot in the dragon's nest. Seeing Frieren fixated on the random items, Stark mentions how Aeson would always talk about how Frieren made their hero's journey ridiculous and fun, cutting back to a time when Frieren had decided to make shaved ice in a dungeon. Aeson had grown annoyed as they were wasting so much time, but Himmel reminds Aeson that they have all the time in the world, so they should enjoy the journey as they go. As the three return to tell the village the good news, they all begin heading out, only to try out the grimoire. Frieren uses the spell to see through Stark's clothes, disgusted that he's so small, but Stark states that he'll be joining Frieren and Frieren on their future journeys. In the fortress city of Wall located in the Regal Canyon, Frieren and gang are refused entry towards one of the northern checkpoints by the guard, hearing that monsters are more active than ever. As the guard heads to chat with the Castellan, they warn the gang not to cause trouble in the town, but Frieren is perfectly okay with staying in town, planning on exploring the magic shops in town. Seeing Frieren's cold glare, Frieren states that she'll head over to book them a room, but when Stark offers to get food with Frieren's glare sends Stark in search of food alone. Now alone, Frieren overhears that the Northern Army plans to defeat the enemies in 2 years, meaning their checkpoint won't be open for another 2 years. Cutting to Stark, he has entered a familiar tavern, served the Jumbo Berry special dessert, confused as he used to split the dessert with Aeson, but now the dessert looks so small. Stark notes how he has gotten bigger, having saw his master's broad shoulder as something to admire, but after some time he outgrew his master. Out of nowhere Frieren appears, eyeing down Stark's dessert, but instead Frieren chooses to order a glass of milk, diligently sitting next to Stark. Frieren asks how Stark would feel staying in the city for 2 more years, relieved to hear that Stark thinks it's annoying as well, but Stark gets weirded out by how Frieren is acting. Heading outside to assess the walls, Stark asks if they could simply fly over the gates, but Frieren reminds Stark that a barrier has been erected to prevent flying monsters from entering. With no other choice, they head over to the Merchants Guild, but are sad to learn that all trades towards the northern land have been shut down, meaning that they can't sneak out via that way either. Coming up with another idea, the two decide to visit the Black Market and Thieves Guild, using Stark's connections and demeanor to find a solution, but sadly there is still nothing that can be done. As the two stand above the walls overlooking the view, Frieren wonders why Stark is being so cooperative, deducing that Stark has an ulterior motive to leave the walls, but Stark simply utters that he's running out of time. Stark mentions how Aeson visited this exact location when he was younger, telling Stark stories about how he visited the northern lands with his hero party, enjoying every second of the 10-year journey. Stark reveals that he intends on having a great journey with Frieren and Frieren, promising to return and repay Aeson with stories of his own before Aeson passes. As both return to town, Frieren spots Frieren acting strange, cornering Frieren in an alley only to learn that the town's guards are looking for Frieren. Out of nowhere, the same guard at the checkpoint kneels to apologize to Frieren, prompting the Castellan of the city to apologize as well for his guard being so rude to Frieren. When Frieren reassures the Castellan that she wasn't offended, the Castellan believes that Frieren is here to slay the remnants of the Demon Lord's army, allowing Frieren through the checkpoint, but this disappoints Frieren. With a massive celebration acknowledging Frieren and her party's departure, Frieren mentions how she never liked the outlandish welcomes and departures. Stark wonders if this is how Aeson felt, making Frieren suddenly remember a similar time when she departed with the hero party, curious as to what parallels will arise next. Check out one of our other videos on the screen or in the info card above. Subscribe, like and comment.